For most 18-year-olds in America, the last summer before college is a symphony of freedom. It's 3 months of spontaneous road trips to the coast, late-night bonfires by the lake, and parties that last until the dawn. It's the time to take one last deep breath of adolescence before stepping into a new chapter of life. But for me, that summer wasn't a symphony. It was a war. A quiet, solitary war waged under the yellow glare of a desk lamp, in the unnerving stillness of an empty house. You see, my goal wasn't just to get into college. No. My goal, or rather my obsession, was a single name: Harvard. More specifically, Harvard Law School. This wasn't some fleeting dream I'd picked up recently. It was a promise I'd made to myself as a kid, watching the admiration in my parents' eyes whenever they spoke of renowned attorneys. It became my North Star, the only definition of success I would accept. I wasn't a natural-born genius. Everything I achieved came from relentless effort, from endless grinding hours of work. And to conquer the summit of Harvard, I knew I had to pay an even steeper price. My greatest enemy in this war was an exam called the LSAT, the Law School Admission Test. For those who don't know, the LSAT isn't just a test of knowledge. It's a brutal examination of logic, of your ability to reason under crushing time pressure. It was the cold iron gate standing between me and my dream. And I was determined to tear that gate down. My months of preparation began long before summer arrived. Every day after school, while my friends were gathering at coffee shops or on the soccer field, I drove to the town's public library. I had my usual spot on the second floor, an old wooden desk tucked away behind towering shelves of legal texts. That place became my second home. I threw myself into my studies like a moth to a flame. Day after day, I imprisoned myself between those walls of books, meticulously working through thick LSAT prep books, memorizing dry, abstract legal principles. Time in the library felt warped. I'd arrive in the late afternoon when the place was still bustling with the sounds of kids in the children's section and the rustle of pages from elderly patrons. But slowly the noise would fade. The sun would set, painting the large windows in shades of orange and red. The last of the visitors would shuffle out. And soon it would be just me, the librarian with her thick-rimmed glasses, and the overwhelming silence. The silence in a large library at night has a special kind of weight to it. It isn't peaceful. It's an emptiness, a silence that breathes. Every tiny sound was amplified tenfold: the low hum of the air conditioning, the thud of a book being misplaced in a distant aisle, the creak of my wooden chair as I shifted my weight. I'd often look up from my books, my eyes blurry with fatigue, and gaze out at the vast, empty space. The towering shelves looked like silent skyscrapers in the dark. The cold, white fluorescent lights cast long, bizarre shadows. On more than one occasion, I could have sworn I saw a shadow flicker at the end of a long aisle, or heard a faint whisper from a dark corner. But I always dismissed it. I told myself it was just my exhausted mind playing tricks on me. I had no time for foolish fears. Every second counted. It was only when the librarian gently tapped my shoulder, announcing it was closing time, that I would snap back to reality, realizing I'd been sitting there for hours on end. I'd stumble out of the library, the cool night air hitting my face, a stark contrast to the stuffy, stagnant air inside. The night sky would be full of stars, but I had no mind to appreciate their beauty. My head was filled with only logic formulas, legal statutes, and a vague, gnawing anxiety about the upcoming exam. Then summer arrived. For other students, it was a time to put the books away, to let their brains rest and synthesize the knowledge. But I couldn't. The thought of taking even one day off felt like a betrayal, like I was cheating on my own dream. My family had planned a big vacation that summer, a road trip through the national parks out west. They'd been talking about it all year. But as the departure date neared, I made a decision that to this day I don't know was right or wrong. I told them I wasn't going. I needed to stay home and study. I still remember the look in my mother's eyes. A mixture of disappointment, worry, and a little bit of pride. She didn't want me to miss the trip, but she also understood my obsession. My dad just clapped me on the shoulder and said, "Go get him, champ. Just don't burn yourself out." The day they left, the house fell unnaturally silent. I stood at the door, waving as the family car disappeared around the corner. And then, I turned back inside to face the quiet. The large 3-story house was now mine alone. It was no longer a home. It had become a fortress of academia, a monastery of self-inflicted torture. I turned my room into a command center. My desk was littered with LSAT prep books from Kaplan and the Princeton Review. Post-it notes covered every inch of the walls, the closet doors, even the window, blocking out the summer sun. The room constantly smelled of strong coffee, old paper, and exhaustion. My life narrowed into a brutal, repetitive loop. I'd wake up at 5 a.m., the first thing I'd see would be a textbook. I ate meager meals, usually instant noodles or a sandwich from the night before, right at my desk. I drank coffee instead of water, just to keep my mind sharp, even though my heart was always fluttering erratically. Text messages from friends asking to hang out were ignored. I cut myself off from the outside world. It was just me, my room, and the colossal mountain of knowledge I had to conquer. Day and night began to blur into one. Sometimes I'd study for 16, 18 hours straight, only to pass out for a few hours at my desk, my head resting on an open book. When I'd wake up with an ink stain on my cheek, I'd just start again. My body began to protest. I lost weight rapidly. The dark circles under my eyes became permanent fixtures, making me look like a tired raccoon. A dull headache became my constant companion, and the words on the page would sometimes dance and blur before my eyes. But I ignored it. I told myself this was the price of greatness. Pain is temporary, glory is forever. And so it went, day after day. My body and my mind were being stretched to their absolute limits. I was like a guitar string pulled tighter and tighter, just one more turn away from snapping completely. Until one day near the end of July. The day my mind finally decided to abandon my weary body. On that day, my body had reached the absolute peak of exhaustion. I hadn't had a full night's sleep in 3 days. Hunger gnawed at my stomach, but I was too tired to even go downstairs to the kitchen. I sustained myself with a single stale sandwich left over from the day before, trying to cram a few dozen more notes into my malfunctioning brain. As I ate the last bite of the sandwich, the exhaustion I had been fighting for days finally hit me. It wasn't a gentle wave. It was a tsunami. A colossal black wall that swept away every last ounce of my resistance. My eyelids felt like lead weights. The pen slipped from my trembling fingers. My head fell forward, hitting the hard wooden surface of the desk. And then, the darkness swallowed me whole. Sound was the first thing to pull me from the abyss of unconsciousness. My forehead was still pressed hard against a cold, solid surface, and one of my cheeks was completely numb. My entire body felt heavy, boneless, an exhaustion that had settled deep into my marrow. I hadn't opened my eyes yet. My mind was still floating in a hazy fog between dream and reality. At first, it was just a distant humming, indistinct, like the sound of an old television with no signal in another room. I ignored it, assuming it was just the echo of some strange dream. But the sound didn't fade. Instead, it grew louder, clearer, separating into layers of overlapping audio. It was the sound of voices, not one or two, but a chaotic sea of sound from dozens, maybe hundreds of voices, all whispering at the same time. A wave of panic started to rise in my chest. But I'm at home, I thought. The house is empty. Mom, Dad, and my sister are thousands of miles away. So who is here? Why are there so many people in my house? A party? No, impossible. I tried to lift my head, tried to force my eyes open to confirm what the hell was happening, but nothing happened. My neck felt frozen, rigid, and disobedient. I tried to move my fingers, but they only twitched weakly. My entire body from head to toe had become a useless block of stone, imprisoned in the very position I had collapsed in. My helplessness turned my confusion into sheer terror. I was trapped, and the whispers continued. They weren't happy conversational whispers. They had a different tone, an urgency, a frantic quality, like some terrible secret was being passed around a crowded room. I couldn't make out a single word, but the collective sound of it made the hairs on my arms stand up. Suddenly, a new sound cut through the sea of whispers. A sound that was sharper and much, much closer. Click, clack, click. Footsteps, not just one set, but many pacing back and forth on what sounded like a marble floor somewhere behind me. There was the soft scuff of men's leather shoes, the rustle of shuffling slippers. But one sound rose above them all, a sound that sent a bead of cold sweat trickling down my temple. Click, clack, click. The sound of high heels, sharp, precise, and commanding. Each tap on the floor was like a hammer blow against my sanity. In a space that should have been silent, the sound of high heels felt alien, wrong. It didn't belong here. My blood ran cold as I listened to those high heels break away from the other footsteps. It was no longer pacing back and forth. It was approaching me. Click. A pause. Clack. Another pause. It was moving slowly, deliberately, as if it was savoring my terror. I could picture a figure approaching from behind, and there was nothing I could do but sit there, motionless, waiting. Click. The sound was getting closer now. Clearer. Clack. And it stopped. Right behind me. I held my breath. The whispers stopped. The entire vast space seemed to hold its breath with me. I could feel the presence of someone or something standing tall right behind my chair. A wave of icy cold washed over the back of my neck as if someone had just exhaled a frozen breath. My body was still, but my eyes, still half closed, could sense a change in the light. I tried to focus all my remaining strength on opening them, even just a slit. I had to know what I was facing. And then, in my field of vision, in the dark space beneath the table, something moved. A shock of jet black hair slowly emerged from the shadows. At first, that's all I saw. Strands of hair, long, dark, and wet, as if they'd been dredged up from the bottom of a deep well. They slithered out onto the floor, moving silently like snakes, and then slowly they began to wrap around my ankle. A cold, clammy sensation seeped through my skin, making me shudder with revulsion. The head of the thing continued to emerge slowly from under the table. Its movements were unnatural, jerky, and disjointed like a broken puppet. It slowly tilted its head up, and I saw its eyes. White eyes. No iris, no pupil, just two milky white orbs, vacant and lifeless like the eyes of a fish that had been dead for days. But they weren't lifeless. They were staring right at me. A piercing, cold gaze, a look that held both ancient hatred and a gnawing hunger. The moment those white eyes locked with mine, the invisible chains holding me down shattered. All of my pent-up terror exploded in a single primal scream, a shout that tore through my throat and ripped apart the deathly silence of the room. Ah! I shot backwards. The force was so violent that the chair I was in was thrown back, scraping loudly across the floor. I lost my balance and crashed to the ground. I scrambled backwards, my back sliding against the floor, my eyes still fixed on the space under the table. But there was nothing there. No black hair, no white eyes, just empty darkness. I panted, whipping my head around. And now, Fully awake, another shock hit me, one even greater than the appearance of the monster. I was in the library, the town's public library. I was in my usual corner on the second floor, but it was no longer night. Every single light was on. The soft, white fluorescent glow filled the space, chasing away all the shadows, returning the library to its usual state of peace. I didn't understand what had happened. A dream? A hallucination from exhaustion? But it felt so real. The cold touch of that hair around my ankle still lingered. The image of those white eyes was burned onto my retinas. I didn't have time to think. Survival instinct took over. I had to get out of there, now. I scrambled to my feet, my legs still trembling. I didn't dare look at the table again. I turned and ran, sprinting towards the staircase. The sound of my footsteps echoed throughout the library, shattering its solemn silence. As I ran past the front desk on the first floor, the librarian looked up, her face a mask of astonishment. "Alex," she called out. "Good heavens, are you still here? It's nearly midnight." Midnight? I had collapsed in the late afternoon. How long had I been here? I didn't dare stop to answer. I just nodded frantically and burst through the heavy glass doors. The fresh night air filled my lungs, but it didn't calm me. I was still in the grips of pure panic. I didn't run home. I couldn't. The thought of being alone in that empty house right now was more terrifying than death. Instead, I ran all the way to my grandmother's house, a small, warm home a few blocks away. That night, I told a few close friends the wild story over the phone. They tried to comfort me, saying I had probably studied too hard, that it was just an incredibly vivid, stress-induced nightmare. I tried to believe that too. I told myself I was just exhausted, that my brain had created a monster to force me to stop, but deep down, a question lingered. If it was all just a dream, why did the librarian say it was nearly midnight? Later that night, as I was changing out of the clothes I'd been wearing all day in my grandma's spare room, I happened to glance down at the leg of my jeans, and I saw it, a tiny, almost invisible thing. Clinging to the worn fabric of my jeans, one was a single strand of hair, a single long jet-black strand of hair. It wasn't mine. The next morning at my grandmother's house, I woke up feeling like I'd just survived a battle. My entire body ached, my head was spinning. But this was a different kind of exhaustion. This was a spiritual erosion, as if my soul had been stretched to its breaking point and was now painfully snapping back into place. I sat on the bed, and the memory of the night before came flooding back. The whispers, the high heels, and most terrifying of all, those white eyes. I tried to convince myself it was just a nightmare, a hallucination brought on by utter exhaustion, a perfectly logical explanation. But then I remembered. My hand trembled as I picked up my jeans from the chair. I turned over the left leg, squinting at the fabric, and I saw it. Still there. A single long jet-black strand of hair tangled in the worn denim. It was real. All of it. I carefully placed the hair in a small Ziploc bag. It became my dark, tiny secret, physical proof of an irrational event. An anchor to keep me from drifting completely into the sea of madness. At least I'm not crazy, I told myself. The days that followed at my grandmother's house were a strange, quiet lull. Her home became my sanctuary, a warm fortress against the world. I began to believe I was safe, that the monster had been left behind, trapped within the silent walls of the library. But I was wrong. The safety was an illusion. It began again on the third night. I had returned to my parents' house, back to my room, back to the obsessive world I had built. And after hours of forcing myself to study, I collapsed at my desk once more. And in that hazy state between consciousness and sleep, I heard it again. Click. Clack. The sound of high heels, faint, weak, like an echo from a distant hallway in my memory. I jolted awake and the sound vanished. This happened repeatedly. Every time I studied to the point of exhaustion and passed out at my desk, the sound would return. A gruesome reminder of what happened in the library. It never came when I was fully awake, only creeping in during my most vulnerable moments. Gradually, I began to fear the act of studying itself. Every time I sat at my desk, my heart would pound. I feared the exhaustion. I feared collapsing. I feared hearing that sound again. The fear of concentrating became greater than my fear of failing the exam. My Harvard dream was being murdered by the very horror it had created. Finally, when my grades had plummeted and my spirit was visibly broken, I told my parents everything again. This time, they didn't dismiss it. They saw the genuine torment in my eyes. They didn't take me to an exorcist. They took me to a psychologist. After a few sessions, the doctor concluded that I was suffering from extreme burnout and that my experiences were likely a complex form of hallucination brought on by prolonged stress and sleep deprivation. His advice was simple. I needed to rest. I needed to find balance in my life. My parents followed that advice to the letter. That evening, they came into my room. My dad carried a few empty cardboard boxes. My mom, with a look of both determination and sympathy, told me she was helping me clean up. They took my books, all of them. Every LSAT prep guide, every stack of notes, everything related to the exam was packed into boxes and moved to the garage. They set a new rule: no studying past 10 p.m., period. At first, I was furious. I felt betrayed. They didn't understand. They were ruining my future. I screamed, I argued, but their decision was final. The first few weeks were difficult. I felt empty and useless. But slowly, as my body got more sleep, as my mind was freed from the pressure, a strange thing happened. It worked. I started to feel better. I no longer feared studying because I knew I had to stop at 10. And most importantly, I was no longer haunted by the sound of high heels. Without the exhaustion, the sound had no reason to return. My house became quiet again. This time it was a peaceful silence. That fall, I still took the LSAT, but with a completely different mindset. I didn't get into Harvard, but I don't feel any regret. Looking back, I feel my parents' decision was the right one. They didn't try to fight my monster. They simply pulled me out of the swamp I had created for myself, pulling me back to a real life, one with family, friends, and a good night's sleep, not a life drowning in pressure and textbooks. Many years have passed. I'm at a different college now, pursuing a different path. I'm happy. However, even to this day, I still maintain that what I experienced wasn't a delusion. That single black hair still sits in a small box in my drawer. The white eyes and the clicking heels were real. I believe there are things that exist in the shadows, at the very edge of sanity, and they are drawn to souls that are burning themselves out. I am no longer haunted, not because I defeated it, but because I am no longer the prey it was hunting. I chose a different life, a quiet life. And that, perhaps, was the greatest victory of all.